Squirting. You've probably heard of this. Maybe you can even do it. Maybe you're really into it. But do we know what squirting actually is? I definitely didn't know what squirting is when it was something that I did during mutual masturbation with a partner when I was a teenager. I hadn't heard of the term squirting at the time, and I just didn't really know what on earth my body was doing. It wasn't until I was a bit older that I learned about squirting, and I thought back to those past experiences and was like, oh, that's what that was. Squirting was one of those things that, amongst many, I wasn't taught about. And when we are not given information about our bodies and our pleasure in things like sex education, we tend to go looking for answers elsewhere. And unfortunately, when it comes to sex, a lot of our knowledge comes from pretty unreliable resources. It feels like there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about squirting. There's also the pressure to squirt and also the pressure to not squirt, and we're shamed either way for it. I have explored this topic before, but on my podcast with pro dom and world record holder for volume squirted, Lola Jean. So if you want to listen to that, you can check it out. But I also wanted to make this video resource all about squirting because it feels like a bit of a hot topic in the sex world right now. So first up, what actually is squirting? To squirt or not to squirt? That is the question. Or what the squirt? Squirting is the expulsion of fluid from people with vulvas. Squirting is often used interchangeably with the term female ejaculation, but that is pretty trans exclusionary, so we are going to stick with squirting for this video. And although squirting is often associated with a feeling of release, it isn't necessarily the same thing as an orgasm. Some people experience them as distinctly separate sensations, for some people they happen simultaneously, and for others, squirting maybe is an orgasm. There's a lot of debate about where squirt actually comes from, and the research says different things about this, but it is widely accepted that it comes from the urethra and the paraurethral glands. This is another name for the lesser vestibular glands or the Skene glands. Your paraurethral glands actually develop from the same cells as the prostate does in people with penises, and they sit either side of the urethra inside the labia minora. This little rose is the urethra, paraurethral glands. Hello! They aren't always visible to us, and size does vary from person to person, but they do swell up during sexual arousal because of the blood flow to the vulva. The paraurethral glands are surrounded by erectile tissue, and they are self-lubricating to provide lubrication for the urethral opening. These are different to the Bartholin's glands, which are found either side of the vaginal opening and provide lubrication for vaginal penetration. Now, that was a lot of scientific information about the vulva, but squirting is maybe less of a science and more of an art. I can't give you instructions on how to squirt every time. In fact, no one can. There is no one way to squirt. Some people squirt through external stimulation, some internal of the G-spot. Some people squirt by continuing to use a sex toy after they've already had an orgasm. And for some folks, many folks, different things will work different times. For some people who can squirt, it isn't necessarily a consistent and controlled thing, and for others, it will be. Some people squirt all of the time, some people squirt irregularly and don't really know how or why it happens. Hello, that's me. Some people can control it and know exactly how to make it happen. And some people can't control it, don't know how to make it happen, and also don't know how to not make it happen. There is some research that suggests that squirting has a purpose beyond sexual pleasure. It can help to flush out harmful bacteria from the urethra that has made its way up there during sex, and so helps prevent UTIs. We don't know if everyone can squirt, we just don't have the research. But people have started squirting as late as 60. And there are classes that you can take to get yourself aligned with your pelvic floor and your vulva and your vagina, and maybe learn how to squirt. But most of the classes will teach you more about squirting generally, although being able to squirt after taking one is not a guarantee. Most squirting classes aim to give information about squirting more generally, destigmatize squirting, and also give like tools and tips around controlling your pelvic floor and increasing your pleasure. We're going to share some tips about how to squirt later in the video, but before that, I wanted to tackle maybe one of the biggest myths about squirting. Isn't squirt just pee? If you want the short answer, no, it's not just pee. The longer answer is, it's complicated. There was a study in 2015 that proved that squirt was pee, but sex educator and journalist Kate Sloan actually interviewed many experts and the leading researcher on that paper and has offered many critiques. For one, the study only contained 7 cis women. 7, which isn't a big enough sample size to give us any statistically significant data, even though it was the largest study undertaken into squirting to date. This is why we need more sex research, people. So squirting does contain some of the same elements as urine, but it is a chemically distinct substance. Squirt contains prostate-specific antigen, or PSA, which in people with vulvas is produced by the paraurethral glands and isn't found in urine. Interestingly, there are traces of urine found in penile ejaculate too, but we tend to talk about that a lot less. Obviously, we know that sperm and urine both come from the urethra when exiting the penis, and yet we don't go, ew, piss, about sperm. A lot of people have claimed that squirt has to be urine because the paraurethral glands couldn't possibly hold that much fluid. But Lola Jean managed to squirt 1,250 mils of squirt during her world record setting squirt in 2019. And then she went on to break her own record in 2022, squirting 1,350 mils. That is a lot more than the average bladder capacity, which the NHS puts at somewhere between 300 and 600 mils. It can definitely feel like you're going to pee when you're about to squirt, but a good tip is to go to the bathroom beforehand so you're not worried about pee when you're trying to get down and squirty. It's also totally normal to think you're going to squirt, but you pee instead. We shouldn't be embarrassed if we do pee a little during sex, and to be honest, you can't really tell one way or the other anyway. This confusion and stigma around squirt runs deep. Did you know that in 2014, the British Board of Film Classification actually banned the production of porn featuring squirt in the UK, along with a whole list of other things such as face-sitting and spanking and fisting. When asked why, the BBFC said it was difficult to tell what was squirting and what was pee, and also water sports was banned on the list as well, which is the name for kink involving piss. This ban on squirting and a bunch of other sex acts was lifted though in 2019. Ultimately, does it even matter if squirt is pee or not? For me, I don't really think it matters, and as long as you're having a good time and it feels good, who cares what it is? Who cares? In fact, it feels like there might be some misogyny involved too, because every time a research paper comes out proving that squirt is just pee, journalists like to run all sorts of headlines that feel really shameful about our bodies, being like, ooh, look, some people pee during sex. And honestly, whether or not it's pee, and it's not, when it comes to cis women's and people with vulvas sexualities, we're often told that things to do with our bodies are gross, and squirting is no exception. Drenched in shame about sexual fluids. Like pretty much everything else with our bodies, we're taught to have shame around our sexual fluids, especially people with vulvas. On the one hand, you've got fluids that come out of a penis that are celebrated and encouraged, and then fluids that come out of a vulva, there's a whole lot of shame around them and disgust. There's a lot of stigma and misinformation about squirting, and even for some people who can squirt, there's that internalized shame as well. There are some people who have been diagnosed and treated for something called coital incontinence, when actually what they were doing was just squirting. And I get it, sometimes squirting can be embarrassing because, well, it can be pretty inconvenient. Some people can squirt a lot of liquid and really soak the bed, and this messiness is part of what we can feel shame about. And if you're anxious that you might squirt, or you're clenching up and trying to stop yourself from squirting, that's not going to help you have a really pleasurable, fun, sexy time. I remember when I was younger, in my earlier sex life, I would often stop sex because I thought that I was about to pee, and I was really stressed and anxious about this. Now I know that maybe if I had just relaxed into it and let it continue, maybe I would have squirted, but we'll never know. But at the time, I was just way too anxious about potentially wetting myself to really enjoy the moment. And it can be especially embarrassing if you're worried about making somebody else's bedwear, or if you're with a new partner. It's really important that sex education involves a discussion about squirting and other potentially embarrassing things that our bodies can do, so that we don't feel awkward or ashamed when they happen to us. And also it can provide us with practical tips. For example, waterproof sheets and blankets exist. They're great to put down before sex to protect your bed or your partner's bed, and so you don't have to worry about soaking everything. And if you don't have a waterproof sheet available to you immediately, then maybe a towel or 2 or 3 will do. Not being anxious about soaking the bed will help you to be able to relax your pelvic floor more, making it more likely that you will squirt if you want to. Taking that anxiety that you're going to make a giant mess off the table or out of the bedroom means that you'll be able to relax and enjoy yourself more. Also, the term squirting can give the impression of something kind of cute, just like a little squirt of fluid, a little squirt. But for some people, it can be absolutely gushing and drench your bed or your partner. And at the same time, some people don't expel a lot of liquid when they squirt. For some, it can be more of a dribble, and whatever your body does is totally valid. So some people squirt, some people don't squirt, and some people might feel pressure to squirt. So where does that pressure come from? Porn, pressure or pleasure? Or stop comparing your sex life to porn performers. While there's definitely a lot of media about squirting out there, whether that's articles, podcasts, or sex research, the potential expectation that people with vulvas should squirt often comes from porn. And I want to stress that I'm mainly talking about mainstream porn here, so the kind of stuff that you can find on free tube sites like Pornhub. There's a whole host of unrealistic expectations that this kind of porn can give us about how we should perform in bed during sex. And these expectations are regardless of your gender or genitals. And we don't need to go into detail about all of those things now, but one of them is squirting. Some porn can give us the impression that squirting is something that everybody with a vulva can do, and that they can do it all of the time, and it always involves orgasm, not to mention the sheer amount of fluid. And I'm not saying that squirting is faked in porn. Maybe it is sometimes. Who am I to say? I do not know. But porn is definitely not representative of what sex looks like for most people. You've got the movie magic of camera angles and lighting and editing, and also porn performers are professionals. They may have trained and practiced and taught themselves how to squirt in a particular way, and we never know what's happening behind the scenes. You shouldn't take porn at face value in terms of what your body is capable of. So I thought it would be interesting to ask some of my audience on Instagram about how many of them squirt or perhaps feel a pressure to squirt. And so the results are in. So this is with a sample size of 15,000 people answering my survey. Have you ever squirted before? And 28% said yes. 61% said no, and not applicable to 11% of you. So that's really interesting in terms of like percentage that the majority of people aren't squirting for whatever reason. The second question was, do you feel pressure/expectation to squirt? And actually only 9% of people said yes, and 80% said no, and then our 11% NA. This low percentage of the pressure was initially surprising to me, but then actually when I think about it in terms of like who is following me on Instagram and who would engage in that survey, it actually makes sense that 80% of you wouldn't feel impacted by that pressure, either because you do squirt, 28% of you, or you're just like, whatever, my body's my body, it's grand, which is good. I'm happy for you. So that's how some of you feel about squirting, but what about navigating partnered sex, whether you are someone who squirts or not? Your partner squirting isn't a reflection of your sexual skills, or you don't get a gold star for making your partner squirt. Lots of us are taught to think about sex in a very goal-orientated way. And I've talked about this loads in other videos before, but as well as being very cis heteronormative, it's always encouraging us to go to the next base rather than being in the moment. Lots of us are taught to think about sex in a very goal-orientated way. And we're also taught to think about it in a performance and skill-based way rather than an experience. Whether you can make your partner squirt or not has a lot more to do with their body and the experience you're having rather than your sexual skills. And not being able to make your partner squirt or not being able to squirt yourself doesn't make you bad in bed. And if you can't or don't want to squirt, then your partner shouldn't be disappointed and they shouldn't put pressure on you to try. And of course, if you do want to be intentional with your partner about trying something, then just create the space for that exploration to happen. And if you do happen to squirt, then great. Also, if you are somebody who squirts through solo sex and it's something that you want to bring into your partnered sex, then it can be a really fun activity, showing them how it's done, giving them instructions, and exploring together. And as we said before, don't let anyone shame you for squirting. Your body is doing a completely normal thing and it absolutely isn't gross. However, that being said, there are some people who may have sensory issues with different fluids and sensations during sex. And so for that, it's just important to come together and talk to each other about how you're feeling and what your boundaries and expectations are. Exploring new things with a partner can be so much fun, and as long as you're not feeling an intense kind of pressure to reach a certain goal, the experience itself can be a really joyful and pleasurable thing. Now, I can squirt sometimes, unintentionally. Still haven't figured it out yet. So I wanted to talk to somebody who does squirt intentionally and does it a lot. Billy Law is a sex educator and porn maker. He's the co-host of the sex and kink podcast, The Dildorks, and a lot of the porn that he makes involves, you guessed it, squirting.
Hey friends, I'm Billy Law, sex educator and porn maker, and I'm here to answer some questions about squirting.
What does your job as a porn performer involve?
Short answer, I create a fantasy designed to turn people on. Considerably longer answer, acting, performance, videography, editing, script writing, marketing, brand management, SEO, social media management, and maintaining my physical and mental health so that I am able to perform in the way that I need to consistently.
Cool, so a lot of the same stuff as a content creator. I love that. Have you always been able to squirt?
This one's a complicated answer. When I first started having sex and became sexually active, squirting came pretty naturally to me. I was also particularly fond of sex toys that focused on the G-spot at the time, and just any sort of G-spot focused play. So that naturally made it a little easier to squirt. When I started testosterone in my mid-20s, it stopped. Not entirely, but tapered off. I wound up squirting a lot less frequently than I did. But around that time, I was also finding myself more interested in larger toys and in playing with girth and a feeling of stretching versus focus on the G-spot. So I think it's a combination of both my preferences changing and starting testosterone. And then when I started doing porn full time, I decided to make a conscious effort to relearn how to squirt, I suppose. Both for marketing reasons as well as it seemed like a fun way to spend my work time for a little while and make work a little bit more fun. So now I'm back to a point where I am squirting a bit more regularly, although it is not quite as core to my sex life, I guess, as it was when I first started.
That's really interesting about the difference between the personal and the professional and the impact of testosterone and just sexualities changing over time. Also funny that you're aware that squirting would be popular and good marketing. Very savvy. Have you ever felt pressure to squirt?
No, I've never actually felt a ton of pressure to squirt, though I can see how someone might. It likely has to do with the fact that it came fairly naturally to me fairly early in my sexual career, and I squirted fairly regularly during the time I was presenting as a woman. Nowadays, not so much, because there isn't a ton of societal pressure for men to squirt, although cis men can do it too. Fun fact.
I'm sorry, what? Cis men, please tell me if you know anything about this in the comments, but a quick Google confirmed this. I'm always learning, Do you squirt every time you have sex on camera? Is it different when you're not filming yourself?
Oh, absolutely not. In either case, frankly. When I squirt on camera, 99% of the time I have planned to squirt on camera. I've put myself in a place that I don't mind making a mess. I've pulled out toys that are specifically good for that. I put myself in a position that is particularly good for that, right? And I'm also incredibly hydrated pretty much anytime I film a squirting video, which is how I create the volume that I do in my clips. I'll be honest with you, I'm not all that invested in the is squirt pee debate, because either way I want it on my face, but encountered enough squirt in my time and tasted enough squirt in my time to know that there is a distinct substance from pee there that is it's definitely not piss. And also I can tell you that it is possible to pee during sex, especially if you have a full bladder. It's also possible to pee while squirting. So if you ever see one of my clips where I am squirting an astronomical, unlikely amount, often it's a combination of those two things, plus the little movie magic. Now, I'm not filming myself. Occasionally I'll squirt if the sex I'm having or the solo sex I'm having involves something particularly G-spotty or something else that is inclined to make me squirt. However, it's not a huge part of my sex life because there are so many other things that I enjoy doing and that just don't make me squirt. It's certainly not an indicator of how good the sex I had or even how hard I got off. It is simply an indicator of how much attention my G-spot got in the time that I was playing.
The intention around squirting and knowing your body is really interesting. Don't forget to stay hydrated, folks. Do you find videos of you squirting are popular and sell well? Why do you think that is?
Oh, absolutely. They are by far some of my most popular videos. And I think this has to do with a few things, honestly. Primarily, the assumption that squirting is the best or even the only way to actually see that someone with a vulva has come. Now, obviously, that's not true because, as I said, I don't squirt every time I come. And frankly, I don't come every time I squirt. Like, it's always a feeling of release and generally a quite pleasurable release, but it is distinct from orgasm. It can happen at the same time, but it doesn't always. I also think cis men in particular are used to associating the release of fluid with orgasm. So I imagine the visual probably resonates quite strongly, feeling of a release of pressure and that sort of thing. Plus, it's showy. It's cinematic. It's impressive. It's exciting, right? We assume this massive release of fluid is associated to this massive release of pleasure, right? It is a thing that we can see the scale increase on. And that's just fun.
I love that, and yeah, I can definitely see why those clips would be popular. What tips would you give someone who wanted to learn how to squirt?
The fastest route to squirting is going to be through G-spot stimulation. It's not the only way, but it is going to be the most reliable. If G-spot stimulation feels like overwhelming or weird, combine it with something that you enjoy, like clitoral vibration, nipple stimulation, or anything else, right? If you're multiply orgasmic, it may make it even easier to find and stimulate your G-spot if you've had a couple of orgasms first, right? Because it's going to swell quite a bit. If you're worried about pee, empty your bladder before sex. That way you know that any pressure is the feeling of being about to squirt, because it can feel reminiscent of feeling like you need to pee, because that's the only other instance in which you're used to feeling pressure around your urethra. When you're getting close to squirting, you are going to feel that pressure, and you may also notice like a sloshing sound, right? And if you were touching your G-spot, or whoever is touching your G-spot, they may feel it swell, right? A little bit, almost like a sponge filling with fluid, because that's what it is. This is the point where you're going to want to kind of bear down and either apply extra pressure to the G-spot or remove the thing that is in your hole, because depending on size and shape, if you're trying to squeeze around something particularly large, you're not going to leave a ton of room for fluid to go out of your urethra, right? There's only so much space between the several tubes in that area. Oh, and buy a Pure Wand. Any firm toy with a good curd is going to be good at putting pressure on a G-spot, but this guy's kind of the gold standard when it comes to that. So if you know you like G-spot stim and know you want to make yourself squirt, this is going to be your go-to. It's what I film pretty much every squirting video with.
Love that, and yes, I have been eyeing up that sex toy for years. Thank you so much, Billy. I will leave links in the description to where you can find out more about him and his work and his podcast. Definitely check him out. So Billy's tips were really great, and I wanted to share a few more bits of advice about how to approach trying to squirt, whether that's on your own or with a partner. Tips for squirting, or how to get your squirt on. If you want to squirt during partnered sex, then giving your partner really specific instructions about movements or hand and toy position can be really helpful. So yes, I'm just telling you to communicate basically. Learning to squirt can be a totally new skill to learn, solo or with a partner. It may require new techniques and different muscles and movements and positions, and it is totally normal to get tired at first. It can be a real endurance test. You might need to practice and build up strength to give the kind of stimulation that you need in order to squirt. And because there's no one way to squirt and everyone's body is different, it may take a while to figure out what makes you specifically squirt. Or you might get it on your first try, who knows? Maybe like Billy, internal G-spot stimulation is best, but other people may prefer external stimulation or a combo of the two. The best piece of advice though, which is, I'm afraid, easier said than done, is to try and take the pressure off squirting and just relax into it and let your body do whatever it is your body is going to do. So go out there, explore, have solo sex, talk to your partner, stay hydrated, get in touch with your pelvic floor. I hope that you enjoyed this video all about squirting. Thank you so much to Billy Law for being our guest and sharing his experience. Thank you so much for watching, and shout out to my patrons who make these videos possible. You can join our community of sex nerds and get access to a whole bunch of behind the scenes content and access to our lovely, lovely community and help support this channel and these videos. I hope that you're all doing well, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!